Greetings from the dark continent. Conscious Caracal here, just to shine a bit of light on what the goings on is on the southern tip of Africa. Tonight I'm joined by another very unique and interesting guest, Wouter Wessels, who is representing the FF Plus or the Freedom Front Plus or the Vryheidsfront Plus. And he is a potential member of parliament, and he will be telling us a bit more about the platform of the party. And we will be discussing something that I found very interesting, and I know a lot of my viewers find very interesting, the idea of self-determination. Now, I'm going to hand over the mic to Wouter so he can tell you firstly just a little bit about himself in terms of what his role is in the Freedom Front Plus, and then we can take the conversation from there. Welcome to the show, Wouter.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, I'm Wouter Wessels. I'm a current member of parliament, or maybe a week before the election, we should say a former member of parliament, and hopefully a new member of parliament after the 8th of May again. I was a member of a provincial legislature in the Free State before I went to parliament. And before that, I worked for the Freedom Front Plus in different capacities, in the office of the leader and at a municipality and so forth for about 12, 13 years. And currently, I'm also the head of our election campaign, our national election campaign. So yeah, I'm tired currently, and I hope my English words are enough to keep the conversation going. But yes, we're a week before the election, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
Oh, absolutely no problem. Now, the reason why we're speaking English is because just from monitoring social media and keeping an eye on it, a lot of my subscribers and people that follow my channel are actually quite interested in the smaller parties, specifically in South Africa. And as I told you earlier before the show started, the Afrikaner folk is not a stupid folk, so they will be able to follow the English, I think, very well. And I think this will just give doing the interview in English will just give a broader informative value to it in terms of whether the person listening is an English-speaking South African, an Afrikaans South African, or a foreign listener that is just interested or curious about our elections. Now, something that I want to start off on, something that's very interesting that makes your party's platform very unique, is the idea of self-determination. And if you could just tell us a bit more in terms of what does that mean to you as a party, the idea of self-determination?
Well, firstly, self-determination is a modern political concept in the world. And if you go and look at modern politics, self-determination is put on the forefront, and South Africa is quite behind with regards to that. Self-determination in many circles in South Africa is viewed as racist, as conservative, as going backwards and not forward. And it's actually the opposite of that. You know, if you look at South Africa, our nation-building recipe has failed. We go from one sporting event to the next, and then everybody is to a large extent proud to be South African. South African flags are shown and are everywhere. But after that, it's back to blaming each other, scapegoating, and one group is blamed for another's inadequacies and problems and so forth. And we don't have social cohesion in South Africa currently. Self-determination is a way to actually better our relations with each other, because we then empower communities. And our constitution, the South African constitution, does provide for self-determination in section 235. That was a success of the Freedom Front in 1994, between 1994 and 1996, when the constitution was written. That was one of the successes to put Article 235 there, because otherwise we wouldn't have any chance of self-determination. Currently, we don't have any form of self-determination, because if we go and look at what self-determination entails, it starts at the level of language rights, of self-determination with regards to making decisions with regards to your language, and being able to, different members of a language community being able to self-determine their language rights, and having the right to use their language, having the right to have a language council, for instance, have schools in their own language, and so forth. And in South Africa, mother tongue education is firstly not prioritized, and we don't have the right to actually use our languages everywhere. We have 11 official languages, but if you actually go and look at it, it's one super language, English, and the rest is actually on the back seat. And there's fights daily about Afrikaans as a medium of education, Afrikaans as a medium of education at universities. We're losing all our Afrikaans universities. And that is sad, and that is not actually then giving the power to the Afrikaans community, but also other language communities that does not have that, is actually more on the back seat. If you go and look at other languages in South Africa that can't even have study in their own language at school level, at basic education level. And then if you go the step higher in terms of self-determination, you then go to cultural rights, where there's cultural councils determining or having a say with regards to the decisions being made with regards to heritage, with regards to cultural situations and affairs. And currently that is also not functioning. And then a higher level, you then get to all the higher levels who have councils where people make decisions with regards to themselves. One example is, for instance, and what we propose is that there must be cultural councils in South Africa where for instance, your school can decide to belong to a certain cultural council, regardless of a race. More non-white colored school can decide to belong to an Afrikaner council, or an Afrikaans school, a white school, more white school can decide not to belong to Afrikaner council. So it's not a forceful thing, but that at the end of the day does give decision making to the community. And we then talk about empowering communities on the lowest level, giving decision making to them. And that's the first steps in self-determination, and the first steps for a group to start making decisions. If we look internationally, you look at a country like Canada, for instance, where a taxpayer can decide if he gives his tax money to English schools or to French schools. And that's one example, simple example, but that's one example of self-determination. And we are still a long road ahead of actually having the right to self-determination in South Africa for all groups at the end of the day.
Right. Now, from what I gather from your explanation is that self-determination is not simply an economic stance, it's also a cultural thing. Now, I think the average South African, when they hear self-determination, their first idea that comes to mind is secession. The idea of, I don't want to be part of the rest of South Africa, I just want to look after myself. But I think, and unfortunately for our international listeners, this doesn't translate as well. But I think the best way to describe your policy is as we say in Afrikaans, the philosophy of self-doen, where you roll up your own sleeves and you do it yourself, because then you only have yourself to blame if things don't work out. Now, my question regarding that stance would be, what is your strategy to communicate to the rest of South Africa the idea that self-determination is not something negative, it's not something antagonistic, but rather something positive? How are you, at the moment, communicating that to the general South African when they hear self-determination?
We still have a long road ahead with regards to that, because that is the connotation with self-determination. And if you go and look at the different forms of self-determination, it's not secession. It's firstly, there's different forms. You have a form where, and you first have to get there, where a cultural community and a community that identifies with regards to a common language, a common culture, where they get together in different territorial locations, spread out through a country, but they do have a common council. They can contribute to the same goals, and they have protection of their rights within a bigger South Africa, or in a country. But then you need to go steps ahead, one of the concepts is subsidiarity, where we say power must be taken down to the people, to the lowest form. And firstly, that means in South Africans, in the South African context, and that's how we wrote our manifesto, to try and explain that to all South Africans, is to say our local government system has failed. That's where the ANC has failed the most. Our municipalities is in a dire state, and it's because of these large, big municipalities that does not actually make sense in their borders and how they are demarcated. And we say make municipalities smaller so that a community has decision making and, as you said, self-doen with regards to their own and what is important for them. And that is the concept of subsidiarity, taking power down to the people, making smaller municipalities, having communities, community-driven local government. And that's the first step really forward with regards to self-determination, and then also to make it better understandable for all South Africans, is that it is in that form, not something that is necessarily a false start or excluding, but it is actually just building blocks and communities being empowered to make decisions about themselves. At the moment, a majority makes decisions on all of our behalves, and they don't have our interests at heart. And South Africa is a complex country on many levels. It's a complex country with regards to different groups, different cultural groups, different language groups, different ethnicities, and further also different economic groupings. We have extreme poor people, we have very rich people, and we have a middle class. And there's a lot of total diversity in South Africa, which can't just be governed by one tyranny of a majority. We need subsidiarity. We need to take the power down to communities so that a group can make decisions about themselves. I hope that explains it to a large extent.
No, I think that's why I asked the question. I think it's a very important point to make. The idea of, and you did explain it very well. Thank you. The idea of, I do think, as I said earlier, when the average South African hears the word self-determination, they immediately think separate, or they think that you are doing things on your own, separate from the general populace. But as you explained there, it is more of the idea of taking your destiny into your own hands, not completely cutting off the world, but making sure that you have control over, for example, simple things like the destiny of your culture. Will your language still be around in 100 years? Will your culture be able to have the freedom to be able to practice its values and your cultural practices in general? And I think that's something very important. That's something that a lot of people don't understand. And that's why I want to lead in this conversation with that very important point, because I saw that as a very integral part of your manifesto in general. And just to address some things in the chat, Defrater Washer says, thank you for the English. It's easier to share in America. Oh, well, thank you for tuning in. I'm glad this broadcast is being watched all across the world, because I know a lot of people are very interested in South African politics. So I'm just glad to be able to do my part to share some valuable information. I see Sideliner Opinion said, Wouter is practicing his English for Parliament. Well done, Wouter, for debating in your second language. Well, I think that actually gives Afrikaners in general the edge, in terms of we are forced to be able to speak fluently in English, or else you will not have the advantage of your English-speaking compatriots. And I do think that makes the Afrikaner people very versatile, in terms of that we can survive in any type of Western scenario, or even doing business in South Africa with foreign countries, in terms of our very good and up to standard English education system. Well, and I think this leads me on to my next question. The idea of, a lot of people make the argument that Afrikaans should be phased out from education because English is a world language. Now, well, why didn't you go tell that to the French and the Germans and the Japanese and the Chinese and go tell them that they're doing everything wrong in terms of their home language education systems. Now, my question then for you is there, what is the Freedom Front Plus's policies in terms of home language or mother tongue education? I know you are for it, but can you give us some idea of, in terms of what are some of the changes that you would bring about? What are some of the basic things you would change that would make a big difference in terms of mother tongue education in South Africa?
Well, firstly, mother tongue education is one of the most important building blocks for a quality education system. We can't have, if you go and compare, for instance, children who do go to school in their mother tongue and matriculate and reach matric, to the number of children that go to school in their second language, who's forced in grade 4 to all of a sudden go to school and have all their subjects in their second language. The fallout rate is much higher in that group of children that do not have the right and do not have the opportunity to study in their mother tongue. And that's very unfair towards South Africans and towards South Africans in terms of, and especially if we take into account that the Constitution of South Africa does give the right to each South African to go to school or to receive education in the official language of their choice. But the South African government did not prioritize that. They prioritized attacking Afrikaans and trying to make Afrikaans the enemy, whilst other languages in South Africa will be advanced if Afrikaans survives. And Afrikaans is one of the South African languages that has the higher functions, that has academic functions, that is spoken in parliament, that is spoken in courts, and has developed its scientific jargon. And other languages can be advanced if Afrikaans survives and is kept as a language that is spoken on all those levels, whilst trying to remove Afrikaans and replace it with English will actually be to the detriment of all South African languages, especially those that are not spoken on education or are not spoken or a medium of education. And the problem is that a language does not survive only by being spoken. A language must have higher functions. If you go and look in history, there's a lot of languages that were much older than our languages in South Africa, and especially than Afrikaans, that is not there anymore because they lost their higher functions. And then they carry on for a generation or two, maybe, and then they're not spoken anymore, and they're completely they're completely extinct. And we can't allow that to happen. Firstly, to Afrikaans. Secondly, to other languages in South Africa, because we must be proud of our diversity in terms of our multilingualism, and we must, at the end of the day, protect that. Education in South Africa is in a dire state because this is not prioritized, and mother tongue education is not prioritized. What we say is more schools should be built. What we introduce in our manifesto is a completely new education system where the child is subsidized by government, not the school. At the moment, the school is subsidized. We say let the child be subsidized, so provide a coupon to a child, to parents, to then have the choice of where to send his child. If the parents decide to have home-based education, then they're also subsidized by government. And if they decide to put their child in a public school, they have the choice in what school. And it is then up to the parents. You enable the parents and you enable the child. And you then introduce more schools. You, as I said earlier, introduce councils which can then govern the curriculums of these schools. That schools don't only fall under the Department of Education, but that they fall under these councils, especially in terms of language, and that there's access to all children, to all schools, but that there are access to all children to schools in the language of their choice and in their home language and in their mother tongue. You know, they say that English is a world language. But actually, if you go and look, you will have more access in Europe, in most countries, if you are able to speak French, not English. The world economy is turning towards China. So most probably, if you can speak Mandarin, you will have more access to the economy than in English. But the most important part is it's a scientific fact that you learn a language much better if you first learned all that there is to learn about your language, and you have your language completely learned, and you can converse in your own home language. Then you learn a second language much better. And then with regards to maths and science, those concepts are formed and are learned much better if you study them in your own language. And then you can do your work in what language ever you can. You can talk English in the world economy, but you learn the concepts in your mother tongue and you're much better. And if you go and look at Chinese, they will build a space rocket in Mandarin, but they can discuss it with the rest of the world and market it to the rest of the world and to other countries in English. So that's the ideal, and that's where we should get in South Africa, to not think we should make everything English, and that will be better. We must be proud of our languages. We are proud of Afrikaans, and the Vryheidsfront Plus will not allow that Afrikaans is blamed for everything that is wrong in South Africa, because that is currently what is happening. Afrikaans is seen as the language of oppression, and the irony is that the majority of Afrikaans speakers are not white. Majority of Afrikaans speakers are non-white, and they are actually suffering because of this concept that Afrikaans is the language of the oppressor, and we must get rid of that and be proud of all our languages.
Mm. I think something that a lot of people forget is that the first heart transplant was done in Afrikaans, and South Africa built nuclear weapons in Afrikaans.
Exactly.
So I don't think the argument stands that not studying in your home language debilitates you or gives you some type of handicap. I think it actually gives you an advantage if that infrastructure is there in place, already giving you the nice, good foundation from the start. Now, something else that has put you, the Vryheidsfront Plus, in the news lately was the BLF court case. Now, you might know better than me. Just for the sake of the audience, can you give us a very brief summary of what that court case entails, what you want to achieve through it, and then where are we currently in terms of what the outcome will be?
Well, let me start with this. I think most South Africans were shocked last year, December, when the president of Black First, Land First said at their election launch in Potchefstroom that for every black person that's killed, 5 white people must be murdered. And that's what he's calling for. Then shortly thereafter, beginning of the year, after the accident that occurred at high school Druk, where pupils died because of that infrastructure collapse, the spokesperson of BLF, Lindsay Marsdorp, welcomed the deaths of those learners because they are white. And that shocked a lot of us, because we can't allow a political party to be to create total racial polarization and to make those type of hate speech in the public domain. And we then went and we had a look at the BLF's constitution. And on their website, we saw that their constitution excludes on the base of race. They only allow black members. And then there's a lot of sections and provisions in their constitution that incites violence. They call for by all means necessary, white supremacy must be overturned and black supremacy must be created, and they call for illegal land occupation, and those are a few examples. And we felt that is a contravention of the Electoral Commission's Act, which provides that the Chief Electoral Officer may not allow a political party whose constitution excludes, on the basis of race, ethnicity, and skin color, and secondly, whose constitution incites violence. And we then brought this to the attention of the Electoral Commission, and we asked, what do they know what is going on here? Was this the constitution that was provided to them when they registered as a political party? And they said to us they will have to compare the versions and they'll get back to us. That was in January of this year, 17 January. After that, on the 5th of February, we followed up with a letter. Once again, we didn't even receive acknowledgement of receipt. We then, a week later or 2 weeks later, brought a prior application to obtain the constitution that the BLF submitted to the Electoral Commission when they applied for registration. And they then provided it to us a month later, middle March, and we then saw it's the same constitution that excludes, that incites violence and so forth. And we felt it's completely unacceptable for the Electoral Commission to have registered the BLF. And we then started a review application. And through the review application, we then, and preparing the case, we then discovered that it's not only the constitution that does not comply, but the whole registration. There were 3 mistakes made. The registration of the BLF was never advertised in the government gazette as it should be, according to the legislation. And then secondly, the deputy CEO was the one who signed the registration certificate and who handled the registration process. But the legislation is very clear that it should be the chief electoral officer, not the deputy chief electoral officer, and that there's no powers of delegation in terms of the legislation. That means that's the second mistake. That's a contravention of the legislation. And thirdly, the constitution that does not comply. So we then brought an application. We also then discovered that we will have a better chance if we first appeal to the commission, the Electoral Commission, to have the decision by the chief electoral officer, actually in this case the deputy chief electoral officer, overturned. We did that, and they then did not hold our appeal. And we then approached the Electoral Court. The Electoral Court last week heard, or this week, Monday, heard the condemnation side of the argument, which in simple terms is about the fact that in terms of legislation, you have 30 days after registration took place to appeal a decision. This is far beyond 30 days. So the commission said we are late, we can't appeal anymore. We said we're actually early because you did not advertise the registration, and that advertisement actually begins the 30 days. And they had a difference of opinion, and that is what we first had to go to court for, because we can't appeal if it wasn't published. And that's the dilemma that we are in, the dilemma created by the commission. The Electoral Court then found that they were wrong. They should have advertised in the government gazette to give parties the opportunity to appeal the decision, to register, and they did not do that. So they should not have. They should have actually heard our appeal, but it creates a legal dilemma because they should first publish before we can appeal. So we are currently considering further steps and how we can take the case forward. And what it is about for us is the fact that we can't allow a political party like the BLF in the political sphere. Firstly, that creates racial polarization, hate speech, as they do. And then secondly, we can't allow the commission to not adhere to legislation. Legislation is not a mere guideline. And the court order this week did find in our favor, and that is a positive to say that the commission should have followed the legislation, but you can't just do what they want and think they don't have to publish. A must is a must. We must pay taxes. They must publish in the government gazette, and that's step one. And then the other contraventions of the legislation is just as important. because we can't have an electoral commission that we entrust with a free and fair election, and then they don't adhere to their own legislation. And that's a serious, serious problem. And that's why we are taking this case forward. We won't allow that. Nobody is above the law. And our problems in South Africa start when legislation, which in most cases, our legislation in South Africa on all fronts, our financial legislation and so forth, municipal legislation, is good legislation in terms of international standards, but it's not adhered to, and that's what's creating the problems. And this is one of the examples of how the majority just does what they want to do, and with no regard for rules and for legislation.
No, I think you explained it very well. Even for people that are not as familiar with the case, I think it's definitely a case to keep a very close eye on, because I don't think it's not about specifically banning the BLF from taking part in the election. It's about a certain principle. It's about a certain setting a precedent in terms of political parties in South Africa should not be allowed to just openly propagate hate speech or incite violence without consequences. And I think that's actually the real fight. Now, seeing as we're halfway through, I just want to thank everyone that has tuned in. You can also, if you have any questions for the Freedom Front Plus or for Wouter, you can put it in the chat just at Conscious Caracal, and I will ask him some of your questions. And also, you can leave a like on the video and subscribe. It helps out the channel a lot. I appreciate it. And you can also share it with anyone that you think might find the chat interesting. Now, the next thing that I want to get into is, it's a bit of a broad question, but if you were to be given a mandate by your voters in terms of you got a very good or successful turnout and voter base come 8 May, and you were given a mandate by your voters, what is at the very top of your priority list in terms of changes that you would seek to bring about in South Africa?
I think firstly, if you allow me, I think what is important is for voters to understand the electoral system in South Africa. We don't have a constituency-based system. We have a proportional system, which means that each vote counts. If you take 10 voters, for instance, and 6 votes for the ANC, the ruling party currently, and 4 votes for the opposition, 6 votes out of 10 is 60%. The ANC then gets 60% of the seats in parliament. The 4 seats on the other side, or the 4 votes on the other side, is 40%. That means 40% is the opposition. When one voter stays away, when one person says no, but it doesn't help, the ANC will just once again win and nothing will better. Politics are not the solution. Then it's 6 people still go and vote for the ANC, but it's 6 out of 9, which means it's 66% and not 60%. The ANC did not get more voters. One opposition voter stayed away. So that's a crucial part of what we are saying, why it's important to go and vote. If people vote for the Freedom Front Plus, there's many criticism to say that the Freedom Front Plus is not big enough to make a difference, and that a vote for the Freedom Front Plus is actually a vote for the ANC. It will make the ANC stronger. And I usually explain it with regards to a scale. If you take a scale and you have the ANC on this side with their 6 voters, and you have the 4 on this side, and one opposition voter on this side decides, no, he's not going to vote for Party A anymore, he's now going to vote for the Freedom Front Plus on this side, will it have any effect on the votes of the ANC? The scale won't move because it's exactly the same. An ANC voter must come over to the opposition side to actually make the opposition stronger, or this side stronger, and create and get the ANC under 50%. But that is crucial to remember that and keep that in mind. What we then say is no single party in South Africa will, at this stage, win an election or win the ANC. That's let's put it like that. So no single party, like in 2016, no single party won in Johannesburg. In Johannesburg, the ANC got 48% of the votes. The DA, the second largest party there, got 35% of the votes. Does the DA govern? No, the DA does not govern Johannesburg. A group of opposition parties, including the Freedom Front Plus, governs Johannesburg. So if you make the Freedom Front Plus stronger, it's possible after this election that we will form a coalition in Gauteng, for instance. Northern Cape is another possibility. Western Cape is also a possibility where no single party will have more than 50%, which means a coalition government is then the future and will be the government. If you make the Freedom Front Plus strong and we form part to keep the ANC out, to keep the EFF out, we will form coalitions with other parties. And in such a coalition, we will carry in our values, our plans, the policies that we put forward in our manifesto. And for instance, the most important thing for us is a new dispensation where we stop with redistributing, but where we create equal opportunities for all South Africans, where we get rid of racial classification in terms of affirmative action and Black economic empowerment, but where the proxy for empowerment is rather socioeconomic circumstances, where people that are poor, people that did not have access to quality education, where they are empowered, and then changing empowerment into growth and development. We can empower through growth and development. We need to give the private sector the keys to create economic opportunities, to grow the economy, to create job opportunities. And then we have certain policies with regards to the economy, which will be crucial to create those jobs. I hear certain political parties say they'll put a job in each household. In 2014, the NC said that they will create 6 million jobs. The DA then criticized them and said it's unrealistic. Well, let me say, promising a job for every household is also unrealistic. Just in Gauteng, you have 14 million households. So you're then saying you're going to create 14 million jobs in Gauteng alone. We can't make those type of promises because that's not realistic. But what we can say is we can create a conducive environment where we can grow the cake that represents the economy, the pie that represents the economy, create more opportunities by creating a conducive environment for the private sector, getting rid of racial-based empowerment legislation like affirmative action and Black economic empowerment, putting the emphasis on growth and development, introducing mother tongue education, and all of those policy directions to actually create a South Africa where there's an education system that works, where there's then job opportunities because the private sector is enabled, where there's policy certainty. We must stop with the emphasis on land, for instance. Land will not solve the problems in South Africa. It's important and it's an emotive issue. But land will not solve everything in a modern economy. We need job opportunities. We need to grow the economy, not to go back to each person owning a piece of land. That will not solve the unemployment problems. It won't put a plate of food on each person's table. And that's the more important aspects which we will address. And a vote for the Freedom Front Plus will enable us to carry in those policies in opposition. If the ANC still wins after this election, polls show that they will get more than 50%, but they will get closer to 50. They are going to lose support, and we are going to be a bigger and a larger opposition. And if you enable the Freedom Front Plus to be a larger role play in that opposition, we can put pressure on government to start implementing these type of things, stopping them from doing things what they are currently doing, and they focus on redistribution rather than building. And if we form coalition governments like in Gauteng, we'll take that policies in there and start changing South Africa for the better and creating a better future, not a better past, creating better opportunities, equal opportunities for all.
No, that was a very detailed answer, Wouter. Just a very small side note. Could you just move your headphones microphone just a little bit? It seems to be brushing against your hoodie there. I see Ronaldo Gous is in the chat. Ronaldo, are you doing some opposition research? I assume. No, but thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate it. Now, my next question for you, Wouter, would be the idea of you were talking about in terms of who you're trying to reach, in terms of who the Freedom Front Plus serves. Now, my very simple question would be, who is your target market? Who is your target demographic that you are specifically looking at in terms of where your voter base is coming from?
Well, firstly, we say we are a policy-based political party. So any South African that associates with the solutions that we provide in our policies are our target audience. But obviously, we focus on group rights and minority group rights because there's actually a lot of South Africa is a community of communities, and that's our target is those minorities in South Africa that's currently the victim of the tyranny of the majority, which are not actually given a place in the sun, which are ignored, and which language rights are ignored, which cultural rights are ignored, and so forth, and is excluded also from the economy. You know, we also want a united South Africa, where we are united in our diversity, where each group has a place in South Africa and a role to play, and where we can take hands as different communities, as different groups, to build a better future for South Africa. But you can't create a united South Africa whilst you are emphasizing racially based discrimination, whilst there's discrimination against minorities, such as, let me give one example of affirmative action as it's currently implemented in South Africa. We had an Indian lady that came to us for help. She works for a government department. She applied for a promotion or for a senior management position, and she's the most qualified for that job. But and she's the only one that can actually meets the criteria to be appointed in that position. But there's only 10 positions on that level, on that senior management level. According to the affirmative action demographic quota, Indians can only be represented as a quarter of those 10 posts. This Indian lady is a full Indian. She's not a quarter of an Indian, which means she can't be appointed. They didn't appoint someone else in that position. They left it vacant. And that's the complete mess affirmative action has created. People are not appointed based on merit. People are reduced to their skin color. It's archaic. And that I think is very important to consider in this election, where our target audience are those people that are discriminated against because of these type of policies, because of this type of exclusion.
No, all right. Well, something else that I'm very curious about is in terms of every political party in South Africa seems to have a stronghold somewhere in South Africa where the bastion of the support is. You, as someone on the inside at the Freedom Front Plus, which province seems to be your biggest base of support from what you've seen?
Well, it's difficult to say. We are growing in all provinces currently. If we look at by-election results, for instance, last year we grew in a by-election in George with 91% in votes, where other parties lost 48 to 52% of their votes. If we look at Mogale City, Krugersdorp, in Gauteng, a few weeks ago, we grew with 86% in votes, where other parties lost almost 50% of their votes. So we are growing in many provinces. Our stronghold, to a large extent, is Gauteng. The polls currently, different polls from different various organizations, including the Institute for Racial Relations and Ipsos, does put our growth on the highest in Gauteng, and we will more than double our support in Gauteng. And Western Cape is also a growth point where we are growing. And then the Free State is also where we do have a lot of support, and Northwest. So that's to a large extent the provinces where we have the most support, but we are growing in a lot of provinces in the Eastern Cape, in Ronaldo's province. We are growing, and in a lot of other provinces as well.
Well, something else that I'm curious about is the idea of, and while we're talking about what type of voter base you have, is the question of, are you more of a rural or an urban party? Do you see most of your support coming from rural South Africa, seeing as South Africa is a majority rural country? Or do you see the majority support coming from urban areas like Pretoria, for example?
We are a more urban-based party, or our supporters and those that do associate with our economic policies are more urban-based. We say there's representation needed for the taxpayer and the person out there that is currently the cow that's being milked to provide social assistance, to provide social grants. 17 million South Africans are dependent on social grants because economic opportunities are not created. And the person that must fund that, if you look at free higher education, it sounds very good, and it appeals to the urban population especially, but it's not realistic, because to fund that you have to increase personal income tax, you have to increase company taxes, and that's, for instance, Ronaldo's party youth leader said recently that we must increase companies' taxes to fund free higher education. But what that will do is that will contract the economy. Businesses will have to scale down. They will rather move up in Africa to countries like Botswana, open factories there. We will lose job opportunities in South Africa. So you go and study for free. It's very nice, but if you finish and graduate, you won't have a job opportunity. So what does that help? So we appeal to that urban market, but we do provide solutions to people in urban areas, in rural areas as well. And then obviously we do have a lot of support from the agricultural community, especially on our stances on agricultural protection, on growing the agricultural sector. Our manifesto provides solutions with regards to that. Our stances on land and the fights that we have successfully fought with regards to putting food security on the agenda, emphasizing the fact that we need commercial agriculture, that we can't only have small-scale farmers, but that we do need commercial agriculture to provide in the needs and the food needs for South Africa, and create jobs also. And that's a modern economy. So we appeal to that market and that demographic, and we have support, I think, across that borders actually to a large extent, but more urbanly based, but also rural to a certain extent.
Now, the other thing that I'm wondering about is the idea of, you were talking about you were growing in every province in terms of support. From what you've seen internally, where's the support coming from? Are these disenfranchised voters? Are these ex-ANC voters, ex-DA voters? Where's the support coming from, all this growth that you're talking about?
I think there's two forms of growth, or actually three forms of growth. There's people that never voted before, and let me put them in two categories. You have young people that for the first time now can vote, and who now registered to vote, and who's going to vote for the Vryheidsfront Plus. There's a lot of them that we pick up. Our youth is growing in the party. We have a lot of support from students and from young people that get involved, and that support us, so they didn't vote previously. Then you have people that could have voted in the past but did not vote for many years due to just feeling disenfranchised with the political system, not seeing solutions there. And there's a lot of them that answer to our call to action. Remember, our call to action in terms of fight back is in terms of go and fight back with your vote. You can't sit passively and look at the political arena. The politics affects all of us on a daily basis. And we all have to get involved, make an informed choice when we go and vote, fight back in that sense, and actually make a difference. So we do get a lot of, and we had a lot of people that we assisted with registering for the first time, or to re-register them at where they now live because they haven't voted for 10, 15 years. And then you have a third category that's people that are disgruntled with the political home that they had in the past. And the majority of them are from the DA, from the Democratic Alliance, who's disgruntled with certain things that happened in the DA. I think the DA said that they want to win an election. They want the ANC support. And to do that, they changed their policies. Earlier this year at a federal council, the DA decided that they support the same race-based Black economic empowerment as the ANC. And there's disgruntled people inside. There's some of them that's still there, that hasn't left yet, but they are disgruntled with the fact that the DA is not standing for an open opportunity society anymore, and is actually now changed its policy direction to the same ANC type of socialist race-based policies. And then a lot of pronouncements that were made, for instance, Swazi Reneke, for instance, Mr. Musi Maimane, who jumps at the opportunity to call racism. Everything in South Africa is not racism. In terms of, for instance, Ashwin Willem's situation was found that it was not racism. Up until today, Mr. Maimane has not apologized to Nick Mallet and to Nas Botha. But he was very quick to call racism, very quick to say he's upset because white people are shopping and black people are working, or that black people are walking white people's dogs and those type of things. We don't need that racial type of polarization. And a lot of people feel that the DA is not the answer for them anymore. And they now found the Freedom Front Plus. There's other alternatives that they also explore. But we do get a lot of supporters that voted Democratic Alliance in the past, that did not understand the system, that thought that they must win the ANC. What we say is, yes, we must win the ANC, but we must also win ANC policies. We can't replace one ANC with another ANC that has exactly the same policy directions, which have failed and proven not to work in South Africa. And those supporters have come to us, and that's the growth that we see and that we will see next week, Wednesday.
Well, just a little side note. At some event close to me, the very controversial song by Steve Hofmeyer and his friends Delant is playing. So I'm hearing it in the background. And it's quite ironic that while I'm talking to a party that represents, among other things, Afrikaner rights, the song is playing in the background. Now, I think something else that a lot of people are worried about, and something that we see increasingly become a problem, and you touched on it very subtly in your previous answer, is this idea of what we call race baiting. And it's where politicians and the media use race-based issues to stoke up controversy, or to get people into a mob, or to get people excited and almost give them a lust for blood in some cases. Now, my question for the Freedom Front Plus would be, do you have any policy suggestions or any actions that you would take in terms of how do we solve this problem of where not only the media, but also, well, not only politicians, but also the media use race-based policies or race-based issues and just race as a proxy to kind of distract from the bigger issues in South Africa, to stoke up tensions and to win some cheap political points?
That's a very complicated problem, and I think it's in the essence of the problems in South Africa is our social cohesion problems, and the cause of all of this is the race-based policy directions. If you base everything on transformative redress and nothing on building a better future, not a better past, you get this type of society. And there's examples across the world where these type of policies have failed, where also scapegoat politics, which the ANC uses and other parties like the EFF, for instance, use to create populism, is very, very dangerous, because it has proven in other countries to then result in severe violence. And examples are Rwanda, Germany with the Holocaust, and so forth, where one group is blamed for another group's inadequacies and problems. And government has failed for 25 years. The ruling party has failed for 25 years to create opportunities, to grow the economy, to provide infrastructure, to maintain infrastructure. And now they are looking, and they, with every election, say, but it's apartheid's fault. Somewhere, apartheid can't be blamed for everything anymore. 25 years, they had the opportunity to build more houses, to pave the roads, to use the money that they were. But they chose to steal the money through corruption, through everything that happened the past 25 years. Money is lost on projects. One example is in the Free State, where 631 million rand was procured for housing to a company, but not one single house 7 years later has been built. Not one single house, 631 million rand. And now the ANC is blaming apartheid for that. That's not apartheid's fault. That's the ANC's corruption's fault. And we say we must change the whole system. We need a new dispensation, where the emphasis is on building a better South Africa, not on redistributing. You cannot create wealth by dividing wealth. That fails. And also, you can't have a society where you think that the outcome will always be the same, that there will be equal outcome. For instance, that we all then can do exactly the same job, that we all can exactly go and study the exact same degree, and so forth. We must have equal opportunities, but the outcome will always differ, because we have different merits, we have different talents. And the emphasis of the ANC and most other political parties currently, and the bigger parties, are on saying that we must have equal outcome. And that's the emphasis of redress that the ANC, the EFF, and the DA speaks about, is redress, equal outcome, not equal opportunities. We say create equal opportunities, and that will already solve this problem and provide solutions where we can stop scapegoating, and where we can actually build a better future and equal opportunities, equal rights. We don't ask for special rights. We don't ask for special rights for the Afrikaner, or for Afrikaans people, or for minorities. We ask for equal rights for all South Africans, for all groups in South Africa.
And I do have to say, I think the best quote to sum up very succinctly what you just said is I can't remember who said it, but it goes something like this: that equality, equal outcome is, or equality of opportunity is freedom, but equality of outcome is tyranny, because you can only achieve equality of outcome through coercion. So I do agree a lot with your policy stance in that regard. I saw in the chat, Roman Kabanak just dropped in to say, just popping in to say, vote ZACP. We look forward to working with the Vryheidsfront Plus to expand the freedom and rights of all South Africans. Well, thank you for tuning in, Roman. I'm glad you are open to the idea of a coalition with the Vryheidsfront Plus. I do find it interesting that, well, you have to understand, you had your chance with Canthan Pillay on my show just a week ago. What I'm trying to achieve with this little mini series I'm doing in the run up to the election that happens on the 8th of May is that I want to give my audience on YouTube, at least, as much information as possible, that they can know what they're voting for. And if they're still in a position where they're feeling they're not quite sure in terms of who they want to vote for, maybe, just maybe, this interview series I'm doing can help them make up their mind. So I've talked to Jared Delport from COPE. I've talked to Canthan Pillay from the ZACP. And now I'm talking to Wouter Wessels from the Vryheidsfront Plus. Now, something else that I want to get to is something that has become very relevant quite recently. Me coming from AfriForum, it's quite relevant to us as well. It's the idea of freedom of speech. So as you are aware, AfriForum this week was part of a court case to oppose the banning of the 1928 South African flag. And without going into that, that's a completely different topic for another day. I want to know your stance as a party in terms of freedom of speech. Where do you stand on that very integral principle? But also, do you have anything that any policies that would strengthen freedom of speech in South Africa? Your thoughts on that matter?
Thank you. I think, we have a very big problem. We are facing a very big crisis in South Africa. The policy directives of not only the ANC but South Africa is borderline on nothing better than what they accuse the apartheid government of. What is currently happening to, for instance, Steve Hofmeyr, and the banning of all his material and on multi-choice channels and platforms is completely wrong in a democratic society where each person must have the right to freedom of speech. If your right to freedom of speech does not infringe on someone else's rights, then why aren't you allowed to have that freedom of expression and freedom of speech? For instance, Steve Hofmeyr has not been found guilty of hate speech. He has not been found guilty of racism. But these type of broadcasters very quickly acts prematurely and bans him bans his material. The song you referred to earlier that's playing in the background, or we're playing in the background, what is wrong with that song? And taking it out of the Gumas, for instance, is completely wrong, and it reminds of the old government of P.W. Botha, and then the ANC is nothing better, and they're becoming just like the National Party, and unfortunately, our mainstream media is following suit, and it's very unfortunate, and we as South Africans must be aware of this, and that's why it's welcomed that AfriForum took this case forward. It has nothing to do with, in my opinion, showing the flag at places and running around with the flag and trying to get apartheid back. It's about that is a flag. And why can't a person have that flag in his house? Why can't he have that flag somewhere? Why must it be banned? And if we start with a flag that might remind of the past. There's a lot of other things that might remind of the past. We spoke of Afrikaans. What's next? Will Afrikaans be removed everywhere because it reminds of the past, because it was the language of the apartheid government? Then we get to heritage sites. So then we're again in the debate of statues and of the heritage terrain. And that's not conducive for building a better future. If you go to other countries, for instance, go to England, which also has a different type of history than ours, but they have an interesting history where there's also, for instance, there was a monarchy, and then the monarchy was overthrown, and then the monarchy came back and beheaded the Crompton, who beheaded the king. But if you go and look and you walk near the Parliament buildings in England, in London, then you see that the statue of the king that was beheaded by Crompton is there. Crompton's head is there, and the statue of the king that followed, that again installed the monarchy, is there. That's history. You can't change history. You can't reverse what happened in South Africa or change it. And there's also not everything that happened in the past in South Africa is completely wrong. There's a lot of things that we can be proud of in our history, and the Constitution. If you read the Constitution of South Africa, the preamble says that we acknowledge the injustices of the past, but we also acknowledge those that built South Africa. And that part of the preamble is not read, it's ignored, but that is exactly it. We have people that under that flag that are now trying to be banned, built infrastructure, did the first heart transplant, and so forth. So even though you acknowledge the wrongs that were done in the past, we can't erase it. And it's part of history. And then we must start emphasizing the future. And freedom of expression, freedom to debate each other. You know, I think one of the issues as well is the fact that in the political landscape, our politics has become very short-sighted. The larger parties, for instance, we are currently, according to the polls, the fourth largest party in South Africa, but the larger three parties make politics about playing the person, playing the party, playing how bad Zuma is, how bad the Freedom Front Plus is. We don't attend committees, is one lie that the DA, for instance, tells. But we don't debate ideas. We don't have a debate of policies in the sphere out there. Voters decide because they are bombarded and actually bullied to say you should not vote for a smaller party, you should not vote for a different party. The ruling party, the ANC, says don't vote for a different party because then you won't get a special grant, or the DA will bring apartheid back, or whatever that case may be. And that's the political landscape that we are in. We need to change that and start talking policies, presenting policies to the voters out there. And that's a form of freedom of expression, really talking to each other, difference of ideas. We are allowed to differ. We can't think the same, all of us. We need to be tolerant to each other's ideas and differences of opinion, and not be bullied to say you have to vote for a certain party, or you have to decide, or you're not allowed to see Steve Hoffman on television. It all comes down to the same, in my opinion.
Right. I think it was Jordan Peterson that said things get really bad 1 little centimeter at a time. And I think that's how censorship works. The idea of it is genuinely a slippery slope. I mean, last night, for example, I was on YFM representing AfriForum. I was doing a debate there with 2 panelists and people that were calling in. And one of the panelists said that I was making the reductio ad absurdum argument that what's next? If the old South African flag is banned, what will you ban next? The Union Jack, because of its history. And quite to my surprise, one of the guys on the panel said, without even blinking, yes, that is the next step. The old South African flag is just a stepping stone towards banning the Union Jack. And my eyebrows almost fell off my face, because that was my bizarre point where I was taking the argument to its extreme, but they didn't even see it as an extreme. They saw it as the next step. So I do think when it comes to censorship, it's definitely a slippery slope. I can't emphasize enough the idea of, if you think the government is going to stop, if you give the government the power to ban one inanimate object, and you think they're not going to go further than that, they're going to stop at that, that's like saying that you're just going to take one hit of heroin and that's going to be the end of it. So now wrapping up the show, firstly, thank you again for everyone that tuned in. Thank you for leaving a like. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for your interesting commentary in the chat. I really enjoy reading it. Something that I do want to end this on, and I have ended every one of my political interviews on this question, is the idea of, where do you see, firstly, the top 3 parties, your predictions personally, not as an Freedom Front Plus representative, just you as Wouter Wessels. Where do you see the top 3 parties ending up in terms of percentages? And then for your own party, Freedom Front Plus, what is the minimum requirement or vote turnout or vote result that you would see as a success?
Let me first say, yeah, it's difficult. There's a lot of surveys out there, and there's still to come. And it's actually very unfair that polls are allowed up until election day, because it actually influences people. But and not always rightly so, because there's a margin of error in all of this. my own prediction, I've been canvassing around the country. I've been campaigning everywhere. I've been in different places. I've been in political debates on different channels and different forums. And I think my feel is that nationally the ANC will get between 58% and 60%. And that the DA will most probably get between 18% and 24%. And the EFF is difficult to predict. There's polls out there that show their support on 12%. That's double what they had in 2014. That would make life in Parliament much more difficult than it is currently. It's already difficult, but they're 20 members currently. If they get 12%, they are almost 60 members, which will make it complicated. But we won't stand back for them. And I think I've proven in the last few years that I don't keep quiet for the EFF at all. But I have been chased out of Parliament because of that. But yeah, that's my prediction with regards to them. I hope they get nearer to 8% than 12%, and I hope that the moderate South Africans go in the majority and vote. If we allow radicalism on all sides of the political sphere, then we'll get a country of anarchy and of chaos, and we can't allow that. So that is my wish, and my prediction for us is we will do well. I'm not going to as the National Election Campaign Manager, I'm not going to put a figure to it. Yeah, that's going to be complicated. But let me say, I think we will more than double our support.
All right.
The system makes it difficult. It depends on the voter turnout in total. We can double our number of votes and get the same number of seats, or we can less than double and get more than double the number of seats, 3 times the number of seats. We have set for ourselves the goal of 1 million votes, and we are still working towards that goal. We've been working very hard. We have teams everywhere in the country working hard, going out door to door, talking to people. We're on social media, and we say to voters, read our manifesto, look at what we offer, and make us stronger, and make us, we are the growing alternative, make us stronger to protect your rights.
Right. No, I think that sums it up perfectly. And I just saw here in the chat, De Freighter Watcher, one of my very first subscribers who is still tuned in, says, thank you, you and your guest. I know so little about different political parties in South Africa, and I always learn something new from your interviews. And I will try to share your channel all across with all my friends in America. Oh, thank you very much, De Freighter Watcher. I genuinely appreciate it. Now, as we wrap up this very interesting discussion, I genuinely enjoyed it. But now I'm going to completely roll out the red carpet for you. In terms of a representative for the Freedom Front Plus, what would your message be to the people watching today? What would your final summary be in terms of what's the message you want to end this conversation on, leading up to the 8th of May?
Thank you. I think we must be honest with each other to say that it's not going well in South Africa. Government is failing, that there's a lot of problems, that things are not going well. Our economy is in a dire state. Our financial situation is in a dire state. Our racial relations is in a dire state. Our rights are being infringed. Our right to freedom of expression, our rights to the language of our choice, to mother tongue education is being infringed. Our constitutional rights are being infringed. Governing party, ruling party, the tyranny of the majority, they are ignoring rules and regulations and legislation. They are not adhering to it. They think it's a mere guideline. The constitution is under threat. And we have to, as all South African citizens, take up our vote and go and fight back. Make our cross, fight back for a better future for all South Africans, fight for your own rights, for equal opportunities for all, fight against racially based discrimination in terms of affirmative action and Black economic empowerment, fight for your right to be free. And we need real freedom in South Africa. real freedom of association, real freedom of expression, and without infringing each other's rights. We need that freedom, and that's what the Freedom Front Plus is saying. Vote for us, make us stronger. We are the stronger alternative. We have proven that we are steadfast on our policies. We grow whilst we aren't amending our policies and our constitution as other parties have done to grow. They've amended their policies to get a broader voter base. We've stayed the same, but yet more people do find us an attractive alternative and are entrusting us with their votes. It's an exciting time. I'm excited about the 8th of May. On the 8th of May, people will show that they aren't passive anymore, but they are actively making an informed choice. And that hand that does make that cross on the 8th of May is the hand that determines the future, not only our future, but also the future of our children and of our grandchildren and of generations to come. And we have that responsibility. Let us vote informed, make the Freedom Front Plus stronger, choose us, and we will not disappoint you.
All right. Well, firstly, thank you very much, Wouter, for joining me tonight for my to continue on my election-themed show that I'm doing just before the 8th of May. Just before we sign off, I want to read some things from the chat that I find very interesting. So Ronaldo Gous has pledged that if you get 1 million votes this election, he will officially delete his channel. So I've taken a screenshot of that, and we will see what happens. I mean, you have nothing to lose. And I also see here someone in chat says, Wouter, get yourself a box of Demizen at the chemist for that chesty cough. It works well.
Thank
and
you.
I also see CHS says, thank you for getting SA informed on all things going on. Thank you, CHS. I appreciate it. Ria S says, thank you, Conscious Caracal and Wouter. VF Plus has my vote. Well, that's good to hear, Ria. Craig Bosman says, mooi gedoen, Rooikat. Thank you, Craig. We should have a beer sometime, man. It's been too long. And yeah, now I just want to take this opportunity to thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I know it takes a lot of effort to allocate an hour of your time to listen to a very serious conversation. I mean, this is not Game of Thrones after all. But at the same time, I do genuinely appreciate it that today at our peak, 60 people watched live at our peak of viewership. It's a massive improvement, and I think Wouter will take a lot of pride in the fact that this so far has been, and I haven't even seen the view total yet, but just by looking at the amount of live viewers, this has been my most popular election-themed episode, just outside of, except for the Adams Roots episode, but I mean, that's hard to beat. So thank you very much for everyone that tuned in. I always enjoy doing these things in terms of getting you informed, helping you maybe learn something new. I mean, whether it's 15 people signing in or 100 people watching, if I can do in my own little capacity, give someone something to think about, something thought-provoking, something to just keep at the back of your mind, on the back burner, just to think about tomorrow, then I've done my job. Then I've done that helps out the South African democracy. And this is just Conscious Caracal reminding you as a public service announcement that opinions cannot, in fact, give you cancer. Thank you very much, Wouter, for joining me in this chat. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. This has been Adams Van Zyl. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.